Hey, I'm Finn, and I want to talk about fantasy and the interaction with our fantasies and self-pleasure and how that can be such a powerful tool to start understanding ourselves on an emotional and more complex level when it comes to our sexuality. One thing that drives me super crazy is this idea that like male sexuality is just solely a function of body parts and spreading our seed and creating an outlet to get off in our lives, because I think that belief is more a function of how we've been socialized as men and encouraged as little guys to stop feeling certain feelings or most of our feelings and to start performing and like creating these bodies that have a certain kind of posture and a certain rigidity to them and a certain way of fucking. And I think that our inner life has been really missing a lot in our sexuality. And when I ask men, what is it about something that really feels hot to you? Often he doesn't know. And I also have struggled a lot to get to some of the answers in my own sexuality, but I think that sex is a vehicle that helps us find the meaning in our lives. It helps us as a lens, if you choose to look at it this way, that it's a lens into the inner workings of our psyches and our imaginations, our longings, our anticipations that we have for ourselves, the aspirations that we hold deeply, also the fears, the regrets. It's a window into all of that. So when you're a little kid, maybe reflect on what messages did you receive about sex. For me, it was like, sex is for mommies and daddies to have a baby. Sex is bad. Sex is a sin. Sex is going to get you punished. You're going to have to hide. Like I had to hide that. You are going to get STIs. You're going to go to hell. I mean, this is the beginning of the fabric of what I absorbed as a child. And all that stuff that we pick up as little kids becomes a sort of belief system, and even things that don't even have to do with sex, even just beliefs about ourselves, like I'm too much or I'm not enough. All that is a foundation in our psyches, is how we develop and how we start to choose our experiences that we have and how we start to interpret the experiences that we have in our lives and the experiences that even happen to us, and how we start to create a sense of meaning and understanding in our own selves. And then we come into adulthood, and sex has been one experience after the other that includes the reading of that meaning that we've acquired. And it also includes this data and the felt experience that we have as little kids about what sex meant and about what it didn't mean, and how we're seeking to really work with all that as adults. So the role of fantasy in all that is, when we have a fantasy, we are actively creating and we're actively imagining ourselves in a certain kind of way. It's like a mirror into the deeper nature of who we are. It's a way to see more deeply into some of this stuff that happened way back then. It's like our fantasy is this like, I've heard it described as like an archaeology of our childhood, right? We're excavating a sense of meaning around the original wounds, fractures, again, aspirations, hopes, dreams. It's all there. So when we look at a fantasy and it just seems like this like static thing, like a story that doesn't really have any kind of bearing on our lives, but it arouses us, we look at it in a static way. It doesn't carry the kind of meaning as if we think about, even the word fantasy comes from the Greek fantasia, and that is an active, it means like revealing, which is a verb. It's revealing in real time. So if we think about fantasy that way, it's this thing that's coming out of us and it's unfolding and it's creating a sense of understanding about what's up for us in our lives. We can engage with that in a really active way, in an affirmative self-pleasure practice, to help us really start to look at ourselves more and understand about our emotional needs and sex more deeply, and even see into some of the wounds that really still want to be healed in our lives. Because if we're using our sexuality in this way, and you've heard me say this, it's like a flame that we follow. Like we follow the flame with the practice awareness of what happens to ourselves when we follow that flame. And desire is a flame. It pulls us, it compels us, right? So we go there, but the part that I think is missing, again, for a lot of us, is this practice awareness of what that is and why and how and how do I use myself in that way? How do I use my body? How do I utilize my body to find and uncover or not? So, there's a little exercise that I like to do for this, in which you write out a fantasy. Verbs. A fantasy can be a story. It can be like the fireman came and pulled out his hose and right? So that's a narrative kind of fantasy. There could also be like the fantasy of like a sexual position, right? Like it's just a position, but that's a fantasy. It's like, maybe doggy style. I feel really, really powerful on my back. I feel kind of vulnerable, and it brings up a lot of shame about me, like in this internalized misogyny. Doggy style. unlocks a sense of permission and a kind of like, yes, I'm a man. On my back, leg spread, kind of pulls up this kind of like misogyny that I've been indoctrinated with. And that's what ladies do, that's what mommies do when they're getting fucked and when they're gonna have a baby, right? So that's what I mean about this correlation of childhood. A fantasy can be like an experience, like an emotion. It can be like this rushy kind of feeling, like, when he just grabs me and I feel just like out of control and I go. Well, something like that. That's a fantasy, right? That's like some component of elements that really help me understand myself as a sexual being. So what you want to do is you want to write out a fantasy word for word. Be really crystal clear about what's turning you on. If you notice yourself editing yourself, take note of that. That's good processing for later. But you want to like get the juicy details. When I was a little kid, I saw my dad's arms, veins on his arms, kind of working in the sun, sweaty kind of. So that's an image that really is emblazoned for me, right? So that would be like a fantasy. You write all this out, and then you go back and you underline every keyword in the fantasy. Words like a, and, or the, random little descriptors, not very important. Things that jump out at you as like a mover of the plot or something that has like interpretive data, underline the word. And then you're gonna go back again and you're gonna free associate. Instead of reading it in context, every underlined word, you just see the word and the first thing that pops into your mind is what you're gonna write above it. It's kind of like a Mad Lib if you ever did Mad Libs. You write the word above it. Once you've populated this story or whatever it is with this alternative word, you've created what's called a counter narrative. You go back and you reread this again for meaning, and hopefully what you see in that, if you've done it, is that, well, often it doesn't make a lot of sense, especially if you're looking for a story or some kind of chronological thing, right? But there will be some sort of sense there around felt things, power, themes around power, themes about like borrowing from the work of Jack Morin, right? The cornerstones of eroticism, you're going to see like the violation of prohibition, like sneaky naughtiness in there. You're going to see seeking power and like where you think power is, what kind of body unlocks a certain kind of power, what kind of relationship unlocks power, what kind of interaction unlocks power, going towards or coming towards you, right? Those sorts of things. You're gonna see in this potentially some kind of like overturning ambivalence, which means like you're having kind of a conflict and the desire itself is to maybe to encounter that conflict and then overturn it, like saying no on purpose many, many times so that you can later say, okay, yes. Or being attracted to someone that you're also disgusted by and kind of enjoying that conflict or something around that. Having sex with an ex, even after you swear you'll never do it again, right? That's overturning ambivalence. Longing and anticipation, which is like this longing is more fun than the having. Like I want, I don't really want to have. Guys on Grindr that want to chat and not meet up, right? People complain about that. I often offer potentially that person really just likes to chat and theorize and long for. So those sorts of things might emerge from your fantasy. Then you've got this counter narrative, right? So then what you do with that is in your affirmative practice of self-pleasure, 2 to 3 times a week, you're just lying down on your back or on your doggy style or whatever it is that you're doing, and in your mirror, and you're engaging with your fantasies in this active way to start churning the juices of your erotic mind so that you can start to understand who you are as an erotic being. That's going to give you such valuable insight, I hope, into the choices that you're making around sexuality, the kind of people that you go towards, the situations that really have a kind of gravity for you, that pull you in. The idea is to start to utilize this in a way that helps you understand yourself, helps you see yourself more clearly. And then you can start to also utilize this tool to actively imagine and actively fantasize yourself in new ways. So in your mirror, when you're doing your mirror practice, you find the elements of what turns you on in other people in your own self, and you fantasize and you actively engage with it. Start to use this projection tool to see yourself in a certain kind of way to help you correct and look at some of the things that have arisen in your past as a child that you're trying to correct and that you're trying to move through in your experience as an adult. I hope this has been helpful for you, and I'd love to hear what you think. As always, email me, finn@finndeerhart.com. That's FINNDEERHART.com. Go to my website. There's resources on there, a book list. I'd love to do any kind of session work with you. Or if you'd just like to reach out and share about your experience, I totally value that. And I love getting to hear and see what's going on out there in the hearts of men. So thank you.